What's up? Welcome into the latest episode of Pod Like a Champion, the blueandgold.com recruiting podcast. I'm Patrick Engel, joined by our blueandgold.com recruiting insider, Mike Singer. First Pod Like a Champion of 2021, and we're coming in still with plenty of news, maybe not necessarily regarding high school recruiting, signing day, by and large over and done with, but Notre Dame busy on the transfer market, busy making some staff changes that might have plenty of recruiting ramifications, Mike. But why don't we just start with the biggest commitment, I guess you'd call it, of 2021 so far for Notre Dame, and that is grad transfer quarterback Jack Coan from Wisconsin, immediately eligible starting in 2021, can play 2 years because of the extra year that everybody got. We'll see if that actually happens. I would right now assume that it's just going to play one. But Mike, you kind of covered the legwork on this and talked to some folks close to Coan. So kind of tell us how it came together in a sense of what Notre Dame wanted, and then how Jack Coan decided that Notre Dame was the fit for him as he tries to find a starting job.
Yeah, the first thing I'll mention on the eligibility thing is it, I do believe he could have that second year at Notre Dame, like you mentioned, but it seems like it's a situation of if he has a great year, he's going to go to the NFL, or if he doesn't have a great year, then Notre Dame probably wouldn't want him back. So I feel like it's kind of one of those deals. But yeah, in terms of how it all came together, he entered the transfer portal. I believe it was December 20th. Notre Dame had a couple of conversations with him between that date and then the January 1st, which is when Notre Dame lost to Alabama in the college football playoff by only 17 points. Held Alabama to, what was it, 30, 31, 34?
Yeah, 31. It looks
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 great right
okay
now.
now after seeing what they did to Ohio State.
Yeah, um, so that game was what, on a Friday, and then Coan committed on a Monday. Between the final whistle of the Notre Dame Alabama game to this time Jack Coan committed to Notre Dame on Monday, there was a ton of contact between the two parties. Prior to that point, there really wasn't a ton of contact. Again, a couple of preliminary kind of conversations between the two parties, and then things really heated up. And look, Jack Coan is a guy who's committed to Notre Dame on a lacrosse or to the lacrosse team. I'll say his freshman or sophomore year of high school, and then football really picked up for him. And then, Notre Dame never offered him a football scholarship. He went to Wisconsin, had a solid, career there. Was better than Alex Hornibrook, who was the quarterback before him, and then he got injured in fall camp and was out for a couple months, and he was available for Wisconsin's last two games of the season, but Graham Mertz is the biggest thing for the Badgers at quarterback since sliced bread, so they weren't gonna bench Graham Mertz and for Jack Coan. But what I had been told by some sources is that if he would have returned to Wisconsin next year, there would have been a real quarterback battle. But Jack Coan kind of saw the writing on the wall that, look, this is kind of the future of Wisconsin at quarterback. Test the waters and see what's out there on the grad transfer market. And UCLA, Rutgers, I want to say even Michigan was interested. Tennessee was very interested. And once Notre Dame got in the mix again, committed to Notre Dame on a lacrosse deal. So he had been to campus before. He's always had an affinity for Notre Dame. So once the Irish really started showing interest in him, it became, pretty apparent that that's where he was going to end up. And then in terms of like how this kind of works for Notre Dame in the quarterback room, Patrick, you know this better than anybody. I mean, it makes a ton of sense. He's started 18 games in college football games. Guess how many Notre Dame games Notre Dame is coming back in their quarterback room that has started? Zero, of course,
Zero.
because Ian Book. That's what happens when you have a starter who's played as many games as Ian Book. So the guys behind him haven't started any games, and Ian Book has not had any injury. He didn't have any injury issues either. Brendan Clark, Drew Pine, Tyler Buckner, and Ron Paulus. Four very green players, and then you bring in Jack Coan with some experience. But just one other thing I want to touch on, Patrick, before we get your thoughts on him is Talked to Matt Miller, NFL draft scout, and you can find that interview on our YouTube page as well as podcast platforms. He said that Jack Coan is not someone and he admitted, like, look, I don't know what else Notre Dame has in the quarterback room in terms of the incoming recruits and whatnot, but he's like, this is not a player that you would just give the job to right away. Like, yes, it's very likely that Jack Coan's going to start for Notre Dame this fall, but it will still be a very open quarterback competition. Like Tyler Buckner coming in, Drew Pine, Brendan Clark. We'll see, how his knee, situation progresses and what Brian Kelly called a cranky knee. So it's still going to be a quarterback battle. Nothing's going to be handed to Jack Coan, but at the same time, you have to feel pretty good about his chances of, being the starting quarterback.
I agree with everything you said there. As far as
It's because I'm a
it just
genius, Patrick.
all knowing Mike Singer here. I mean, his wish is everybody's command, just because you'd be stupid to say otherwise, right? But all right. Anyway, before I dive into my thoughts, I went back, spent most of that Monday after the week after the playoff loss to Alabama, watching 2019 Wisconsin games. But I'll dive into that in a second. First, we'll make sure you guys are subscribed to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that thumbs up button on this particular video. And you can follow us on Twitter. Follow me at Patrick Engel _. That's ENGEL. And you can follow Mike at Rivals _Singer. And if you'd be so kind, if you're listening on the podcast platforms, on Apple Podcasts, I should say, please leave us nice comments and a 5-star review if you like what you hear. We'll love you forever. So Jack Coan, like you said, Mike, 18 starts, 14 of those in 2019. And I agree. And it just, you're putting a lot of faith into a lot of guys with 0 starts if you didn't make some kind of move like this. And when you go back and watch Coan himself, you kind of see the fit of like really wanting to make sure your quarterback floor is pretty high. And no, this isn't exactly a super high ceiling move, but I think you look at it as the worst case scenario of Notre Dame's quarterbacks is that, all right, you're getting solid QB play. Where if you just rolled with the other 4, I mean, I think
Unknown.
it's a low risk that none of them can hack it, but it's a non-zero chance at the same time. And you look at the high floor when you watch him and just think, he's a good fit in what Notre Dame did last year with its offense, as far as being able to make quick throws, using tight ends, looking that way, run heavy offense, being able to operate that. A lot of similarities and just identity there between them and Wisconsin, but a different type of player than Ian Book, where Book's best attribute, you'd probably say, was his ability to improvise, extend plays, scramble, and just make things happen outside of the play structure and outside of the pocket. And Coan isn't necessarily going to do that. I think when I went and took the sack yards out of his rushing yards last year, I think he was at 137. It's somewhere in that mid 100s. I can't remember off at the top of my head, but you see really good pocket poise and an ability to go through reads quickly and deliver crisp throws. He didn't take a ton of high volume downfield throws and shots, just not really what Wisconsin asked him to do. But when he did, he was efficient there. 16 of 32 throws, at least 20 yards downfield. But yeah, I think you like this in the sense of just someone who you're going to ask to run an offense and feel good that will be able to see the field well and deliver throws on time. His accuracy at 69% completion rate. I think his on target rate was I believe it was 77 or mid 70s. Again, I don't remember off the top of my head here, but all of those things aren't quite the same as what you would think about Ian Book. But I think you like bottom line it and you look at both of them as 2 guys who should be able to run Notre Dame's offense pretty effectively.
Yeah, I would have been shocked if Notre Dame didn't take a graduate transfer, especially with rumors that maybe I shouldn't even say rumors, that it's pretty well known at this point that Brendan Clark, has a knee problem, and that's a big reason why you didn't see him playing late this season, and Drew Pine was inserted in the college football playoff game when Ian Book had to come out for a play. So yeah, it was, the staff might absolutely love Brendan Clark, but you can't be 100% sure, with the knee injury. That's not something you want to mess around with. Like if his knee's not in a good shape, then you gotta go get somebody with experience, because that's your oldest quarterback in the room up to before Jack Coan is brought in. So solid get for Notre Dame. Talking to his high school coach, and you can find that article at blueandgold.com. Just absolute gym rat Jack Coan is. He's going to get to Notre Dame later this month, start classes early February, and then be an absolute nut, in terms of just learning the offense right away. He'll get there before the coaches leave, after the coaches are already gone, that kind of kid. So get in touch with the receivers and start throwing. So Jack Coan will be like, his game's much different than Ian Book, but similar to Ian Book in like mindset and leadership qualities. Like, you say what you want about Ian Book, but you can't say anything about, or anything bad about, just how dedicated he was to his teammates. He was always a fighter, and would scrap and claw down to the very end. And that's what Jack Coan's going to be as well. Like, he's going to be someone that you absolutely love in your locker room.
I'll end it with this, in that I think the biggest similarity that you see between the two is toughness,
Yeah.
where I don't think that was at all a thing you questioned with Ian Book.
Sure.
And when you look at Coan, again, very much a pocket passer and wants to operate within that structure. But when you watch some of his games, and I ended up 3 full games of his, and then went and found every touchdown pass he threw in 2019. You see him deliver a lot of on target throws and shots right when he's taken a big hit, or he's hitting, he's thrown, and or throwing, like knowing right as I release this, I'm going to get crunched. And he's not particularly scared of that. At least it doesn't show up in that. And that he's still been able to see that kind of thing, step into a throw, and put it where it's supposed to be. So you see kind of some toughness there. And he's a big guy and able to absorb some of those hits, but a willingness to throw right when he knows he's about to get popped. And yeah, definitely not the runner that Book is, but I mean, like you said, he's a former lacrosse player. You can't be lead-footed and be running around there on a lacrosse field for how long lacrosse games are. I have no idea, but and you see functional mobility. If he needs to escape or scramble, he can do it. And even though it's not going to be a situation where, like Ian Book this year had, again, if you get rid of the sacks, more than 600 rushing yards. I don't think you're going to see Coan get anywhere near that.
Probably like Mac Jones-ish in terms of mobility.
Yeah,
Mac Jones pick up yardage when he needs to. He's not Tom Brady or Peyton Manning out there in terms of just being super slow, but like, they can get 10 yards when there's no one around.
Yeah, it's functional mobility. It's there when you would need it to be there, more often than not.
Sure.
So that's one big addition for Notre Dame. The other, and we'll touch on mainly the recruiting impact here, is of course the new defensive coordinator, Marcus Freeman, coming over from Cincinnati, where the work he did on the field speaks for itself if you just watch Cincinnati's defense the last 3 years. And in part, that's good because he recruited good players for it. He's coming in here with as much of a recruiting reputation as he is just known for the work he did as far as putting out a good defense out there. And really, for what Notre Dame needed in this hire, I think was someone who could really make a difference on the trail, as much as it was someone who could keep the defense at or very close to the level that Clark Lee and Mike Elko had it at. And we won't see that answer necessarily until, September 5th or 4th, whatever day it is that Notre Dame plays Florida State to open 2021. But until then, I mean, we'll be able to see just what he can do on the recruiting trail and what the impact he has in particular can be. So, Mike, I know you've already kind of started doing the reporting on this, but kind of tell us about what kids have had to say about Marcus Freeman as a recruiter, and some early targets perhaps that you might even see Freeman start to pursue that are newer ones, or that he was recruiting in Cincinnati or had committed at Cincinnati, or guys that perhaps Notre Dame had offered that he might be able to make a little bit more inroads with.
Yeah, first mention real quick for like the written version that goes into more detail, all this stuff. Go to blueandgold.com. I had the gold standard that I posted on Monday that got some specific 2020 recruit, I should say, reaction, plus some of the Notre Dame signees in the 2021 class. And then I wrote a full article, and I'll leave this in the comment section of the YouTube video here. Was my recruiting impact story, right, where I dove into that as well. So I'll give some of my thoughts there, but um, I want to first mention like comparing him and Clark Lee as recruiters. Clark Lee was an excellent closer, but from what I had gathered about Clark Lee, he wasn't as ton into the day to day, like just texting a kid every day or every couple days. That seemed to be more of Nick Lazinski, the defensive analyst, seemed to be more with the day to day, and then those two would get on like a Zoom and like close the deal with like a Prince Colley or that. So Clark Lee was a good recruiter, but not so much maybe a grinder. And I understand like defensive coordinator, it's tough to be a coordinator and recruit. Like it happens, like people do it, but Clark Lee, just kind of delegated a little bit to Lazinski, and I think that really worked. So it'll be interesting to see if Freeman is similar to that, or if he's just going to be a dog on the recruiting trail and be a dog as a defensive coordinator too. Dude's got 6 kids, so that's tough. But from everything I've got of him at Cincinnati, and then Purdue before that, he's a very good recruiter. And he played for Ohio State. He went to school at Wayne and Huber Heights, which are churning out talent every year, and has a couple of Notre Dame targets. That Notre Dame's already offered from that high school. Emil Wagner, a offensive lineman, and Elijah Brown, a tight end / defensive end. Notre Dame offered as a defensive end, but a solid tight end prospect as well. So people have asked me, Mike, what do you expect his recruiting role to look like? As far in terms of how much on that day to day, I don't know, but you can expect him to be dialed in Ohio. You can expect him to be dialed in with linebacker recruiting across the country, and then helping close on all the other defensive prospects. Those are kind of my expectations. And getting into a couple of names specifically, he did have 2 4-star recruits already committed in the 2022 class that I want to touch on. Melvin Jordan from Clearwater, Florida, actually, where when I lived in Florida, that's where I was based as well. So I know a good bit about Melvin Jordan. Solid player, a little undersized, 6'2", 215 right now. And in terms of height, I like my linebackers a little, 6'1", 6'2", and listed at 6 foot. You're probably 5'11", just because that's how the listing goes. But solid player inside the Rivals, 250, number 6 inside linebacker in the country. So I think Melvin Jordan is a name to keep an eye on. And then another is Derek Shepard, 6'3", 295-pound defensive tackle, who committed to Cincinnati just last month, ranked as the number 12 player at his position and number 187 overall in the country. Now, Shepard's teammate at Archbishop Alter in Ohio is CJ Hicks, 5-star, number 10 player in the country, number 1 outside linebacker, 6'4", 218. Now, Hicks he loves Marcus Freeman, so there had even been some rumors that Hicks was considering a flip to Cincinnati. I want to say it was about 3 months ago. I remember seeing some articles about that on Rivals. So I'm sure Marcus Freeman would love to add CJ Hicks, and that's someone who Notre Dame was recruiting earlier in 2020, and then he committed to the Buckeyes in May, so it could be a name to keep an eye on. I don't know, how open CJ Hicks would be to Notre Dame when I did talk to him when he got the offer. He was pretty excited about the Fighting Irish, but obviously, nothing came of that. But with Marcus Freeman in there, it could change the game. And then there's a handful of other linebacker targets that Clark Lee and Lazinski were after. We will see what new prospects they go after, which prospects they've already been recruiting, they continue to go after. But Sebastian Cheeks was a guy who had built a very strong relationship with Marcus Freeman when he was at Cincinnati. And when I talked to Cheeks, he was fired up about this hire for Notre Dame. And he was very disappointed when Clark Lee left because he had a very strong relationship with Lee. And you see for our YouTube audience to see the future cast says 100%. I put in a future cast pick for Notre Dame to land Cheeks, and then the Clark Lee news came about. I'm like, man, I'm not so sure about this. We'll have to see who they hire as the DC and linebackers coach. Well, as disappointed as Cheeks was in Lee leaving, that's how excited he was about Marcus Freeman being hired. So Notre Dame is right back in the driver's seat for Sebastian Cheeks, 6'2", 210-pounder. Ranked as the number 13 outside linebacker, and he would be a big get for Notre Dame. So just kind of wrapping up, Patrick, I'm curious of like how active daily Freeman is in recruiting, but you get a new job, you want to come and improve yourself and really kill it, and especially for someone like Freeman, who I don't expect him to be at Notre Dame for more than a year or two because he's going to be a head coach somewhere. He come in, do a great job and really cement yourself as an elite recruiter.
Those you've seen that commercial where I don't remember what the thing it's advertising is, but it's some guy in a home like Zoom office, and his kid is like distracting him on Zoom or whatever. That's what I picture Marcus Freeman's Zoom calls as, just with 6 youngsters running around the house, or at least when he's talking to recruits. Like I'm sure some of his kids make a cameo there, which I don't see why it would hurt.
About 10 minutes ago, my cat came across my desk, and I was texting my wife, come get the cat. So my cat might have made a cameo. That's just these days, man. We're doing these podcasts remotely, so hey, that's 2020 and now 2021.
So let's move to our special guest here, a recurring guest, and the first recurring guest on Pod Like a Champion, Yolanda Jackson, the mother of 4-star Notre Dame signee, Deion Colzie. Had a great conversation with her in the fall. Now, of course, Deion is signed. So let's welcome in Yolanda Jackson.
Joining us now is probably my favorite person in the world, other than my wife. I hope she's not listening to this podcast. But that's Yolanda Jackson, the mother of Deion Colzie, Fighting Irish, 4-star wide receiver signing. Now, Yolanda, the last time we had you on our show, you are our first recurring guest, by the way, on Pod Like a Champion. I hope you are honored.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
The last time we had you on, we asked you, because that was right after Deion committed a couple weeks afterwards, and asked you, to kind of hit you that, your son is recommitted to Notre Dame, of course, the school that you're a huge fan of. You said it wouldn't hit you until he signed. Well, he signed in December. Is it hit you? Just how excited are you that, he's official with Notre Dame?
He did. He finally signed in December, and I'll say that morning, actually the week leading up to the actual signing day, I'll say I started to get excited, like really excited that it was finally really happening. And then the morning of signing day was special. It hit me once we got to the school and actually got ready for the ceremony. So to speak, that when it really hit me that this was really real. And so I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it, which I've been looking forward to it for 4 years now. But now that he is officially signed, I am really looking forward to the season, and just seeing how he can come in and contribute, and just make Notre Dame better.
I want to ask about like what the signing day process was like. So, it's not, sitting by or faxing in like it used to be, 10 years ago or whatever. Like, I believe you guys do like an e-sign right at 7 a.m. Then you have like a ceremony later in the day and then sign like actual papers. Like, what was the whole signing day process like? I know you guys also had to send in the videos to Notre Dame for Deion's the video that Notre Dame released, which was awesome. And what I learned the most about all those videos is that all these kids have nicer cars than me, so now I'm in the market for a new car. So just tell us about that whole process of signing with Notre Dame.
Okay. Well, you were correct. We did actually electronically sign everything at 7 that morning. However, they had also sent us out a packet, which was basically the same forms that we were signing electronically. They sent us a hard copy so we could kind of use those, for the actual ceremony. So we signed at 7 that morning. We went to the school. Now his ceremony at his school started at 8:45 that morning. I want to say they had about 5 athletes that were signing to different schools that day. And so, we got there and we we got all set up. The last time I was on the podcast, I had the pop-up banner display behind me of Deion. So of course we had that at the school, along with some other things that I had picked up to put on the table. So it was really exciting, but the most exciting part for me was actually sitting there and listening to Deion, say his or give his thank yous and those sort of things. You never know, um, a lot of times what your child is thinking throughout all of this stuff. And it really wasn't until he started to speak about his process that I realized how genuine he is and how much he really is appreciative for everybody that played a part in this whole process. And my favorite part of what he said was, when he made the statement that if you had asked the freshman Deion, would he be signing to his dream school in 4 years, he would have told you it never would have happened. Um, and so that part kind of hit home for me, that he was and he is and he will be truly realizing his dream, and that's to play at Notre Dame.
So I believe you touched on this the last time we had you on, Yolanda, but you've made your travel plans already before he even signed. Tell us about what you're planning to do as far as how what your games you're catching in person of the Notre Dame season next year.
Well, so Frank and I, when we found out that he was, recommitting to Notre Dame, we went ahead and made all of our travel arrangements because, as you know, and everybody else knows, it's really hard to get to a Notre Dame game. And so I have a very good friend of mine who's a travel agent. So I pulled out my friend card and sent her the 2021 schedule, and had her to book all hotels for every single game, and flights. Now, the games that are going to be closer to us, I know we play Florida State in Florida State. So there are a few games that we're going to drive to, but we'll be flying in for every home game, as well as the game in California as well. So we're ready. We're locked and loaded and ready to go.
So Deion, he's actually got a pretty solid shot to make an impact in this fall. I mean, you have Bennett Skowronek and Javon McKinley. Those are your two leading receivers. Well, they're off to, in terms of like outside receivers, of course, Michael Mayer had a fantastic season at tight end, but that's not the position Deion's going to be playing. He's going to be one of those outside receivers, and Ben Skowronek and Javon McKinley played those roles, and they are off to greener pastures. So it's really a wide open competition. How's Deion feeling He's not an early enrollee, so he won't get to have spring ball. But look, Chris
Right.
Tyree and Michael Mayer played huge roles this past season. They weren't early enrollees either. So, just how's Deion feeling about heading into his freshman season?
He's actually, when I've talked to him, he's actually feeling good about it. He is really just ready to get there. Start his training. Start working out. And do whatever it is that he needs to do to gain a starting role. He's excited. As well as I know, he doesn't shy away from competition. He loves competition because it makes him stronger. It makes him better. So we expect that he's gonna come in and he's gonna compete, to try to get a starting position.
And Yolanda, I want to end with a question more about you. And you're a veteran, and I believe you've discussed
Yes.
this in prior interviews about how that has even shaped yours and Deion's relationship. But I just kind of wanted to give you the floor to talk about being a veteran and mental health awareness for veterans, as I know is something you're passionate about, especially in this 2020, 2021 times that are obviously more difficult for us all.
Yes. So for those who may not have read the article that came out maybe a year or so ago about Deion and I and my fight with PTSD. But I served in the U.S. Army for 10 years. Actually served during Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield, and so was diagnosed with PTSD because of that back in 2015. So one of the things that I always tell people is that I am a PTSD survivor. It is a daily fight. It's a daily grind. But I always tell people that, I'm a survivor. I am an advocate for mental health, especially for veterans, because a lot of times, our veterans, for whatever reason, don't get the help that they need when it comes to mental health awareness. And there are so many veterans who suffer from PTSD, whether they are diagnosed or undiagnosed. And so I, take every opportunity that I can and that I have to make people aware that PTSD, first of all, is a very real illness. It is not one of these things where you wake up one day and you just decide, oh, you know what, I got PTSD today. It doesn't work like that. It can take, you know, days for you to deal with it. It can take years before the onset. So, like for me, it actually took years before I started really having to deal with, the ramifications of my time in the service and my time in the military. Um, and so, what I love about my situation is that I have a very supportive, family. So that's from my husband Frank, to my best friend, and then especially to Deion. And what people don't understand about Deion is that because of my illness and because it hit me really when Deion was in middle school, a lot of times when Frank was away at work, Deion was the one that had to be home and had to help his mom get through some really, really tough and sometimes, some horrible, horrible times. And it kind of forced him to be mature a lot sooner than most kids are. Um, but the one thing I love about that is that he never gave up. He is my biggest source of encouragement. A lot of people also don't know that in dealing with the PTSD, I have issues when it comes to crowds. And so a lot of times, if I'm in crowds, it can trigger panic attacks and anxiety for me. And one of the things that Deion did over the course of the last couple of years, especially when we were visiting schools, because when you're visiting schools, you're visiting a school, an unofficial visit during a game, and it's crowded. And I can remember, when Notre Dame played Georgia here, and we went to that game, and I had a panic attack during that game, but it was Deion who, was there, who held my hand and, reassured me that things were okay and kind of walked me through it to make sure that I was okay. And so for that, I'm thankful for him, and I love him for that, because it takes a strong kid. And it takes a kid with maturity beyond their years to be able to deal with something like that, and to watch your mom really go through what I was going through was hard on him. It was hard on him. It was hard on his sisters. But I think it was harder on him because when Frank wasn't home, he was the man of the house. And so he had to make sure that his mom was okay. And so for, a 12 or 13-year-old kid, that was a lot, but he handled it with grace. He handled it with maturity. And, I don't know what I would have done had he not been there.
Wow.
And so I share my story. I'm not going to go through it here, but I share my story with anybody that I can share it with, because I want people to know that PTSD does not have to take over your life. I want people to know that you can live with it. I've been in therapy for ever since my diagnosis. I am still in therapy. And I don't know how long how much longer I'm going to be in therapy. I might not ever get out of therapy, but I can say that because of therapy, I'm able to do now. I'm here. I can function, and I don't have to worry about a lot of the things that I used to worry about before.
Is there any way people can help? What can people do that want to help out those with PTSD?
Um, so my advice will be, the first thing is to, if you have someone in your family or a friend or whomever that you feel like might be exhibiting signs, of PTSD, first and foremost, get them to therapy, get them a proper diagnosis, and then be supportive of them, because it's hard. A lot of times it's hard to associate with people depending on, you know, um, the cause of your PTSD. It can be hard. A lot of times we are lonely. And I say that because you the illness causes you to pull away from everybody, because you feel like nobody understands what you're going through. You feel like, nobody can help you. You feel like you're at your wit's end. And so I always say, you know, pick the phone up and call people, especially now, because you just never know what's on somebody's mind. And with COVID, um, I think COVID is increasing it, because of the circumstances surrounding COVID. You have to self quarantine. You have to be away from your loved ones if you have been exposed or think you've been exposed. And so for somebody that suffers with PTSD, and then on top of that, you have to be quarantined, it's hard. So even if you can't visit them, pick up the phone and call them, because a phone call, I mean, that one phone call can save somebody's life.
Yolanda, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about your son and also sharing your story. I really hope that, people take what you said to heart.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure to have Yolanda on, and a lot of neat insights into the little nitty gritty things of signing day, but of course her touching story about how her and Deion have dealt with PTSD. But that'll wrap it up for this episode of Pod Like a Champion. We will talk to you guys again in a couple of weeks as we get closer to the late signing period and anything that happens with Notre Dame there. We will talk to you again later in January, kind of previewing what might happen there. Until then, take care.